So once we have the fresh installation of the Windows Server, we can go ahead and move in with the deployment of the Active Directory. Active Directory will be a core in the environment, since it's going to be how we'll manage the users, basically the environment permission, users, hosts, group policies, and other things that are related to general IT management. In order for us to install Active Directory on this host, we'll need to do a few prerequisites. Some of them are optional, but some of them are pretty much mandatory. So first of all, I'm going to change the host name. So right now the machine name is the default generated. So I'm going to do properties on this PC, which is the icon that replaced old computer management. I'm going to change the name of the host. So I'm going to name it Lab DC1. And once I'll name it, it'll ask to reboot the machine. I would hold off and do close but not reboot, because we want to do another change. We're going to change the IP setting. And this is also very important. The reason why we're changing the IP setting is because Active Directory will become the heart of the network to some degree, at least in terms of DNS traffic. And you need to specify a static IP for Active Directory when you install it. If you won't specify a static IP and static DNS configuration to point to itself, basically it's not going to be able to continue some of the installation steps without warnings or problems. And also it's a very good practice, because once you install Active Directory, you want the clients to be able to find you consistently. You don't want to have like relying on DHCP or reservation or anything in order to get the IP correct. So you want to get the IP. I'm going to use the range of 192.168.2, which is a new range that I'm creating right now. I'm going to give it the IP of 250, just so it'll be like very far from the DHCP range if I'm going to configure one in this environment. And I'm going to give the gateway of 2.1, which doesn't currently exist. In terms of the IP for the DNS, I'm going to point it to itself. 127.0.0.1 will mean that it will use itself to resolve DNS. It's not going to work right now, obviously, because there's no DNS server installed. But once we install the Active Directory, the DNS service will be installed, and then we will be our own DNS server, and I'll continue the configuration from there. So right now, after we did those two steps, it's not really mandatory to restart, but it's just good practice. Sometimes there are bugs if you do the installation and you don't reboot after you change the name. Sometimes there are all kinds of conflicts. You really don't want to take the risk for no reason. Installing Active Directory is something that you don't do a lot of in the environment. You'll do it once, and then you have the environment in place, and you'll only grow with it. So it's very important to not take extra risks in this step. Just to save you time and effort. We don't want to be stuck in all kinds of deep troubleshooting for no reason. So right now, once we have the server after reboot, we're going to add the role features, which is the server manager opens all the time automatically when the machine boots. You can get to it also by clicking Start, Server Manager, or under Administrative Tool, I believe it appears as well. But once you access this server manager, you need to select the Add Roles and Features. Then you need to ask role feature based installation, and then you can see you can select from a pool if you have control over multiple server. Obviously we only have control over the single server here, so I'm going to select the lab DC1, and then we're going to add the role that we want. As you can see, there's quite a lot of roles in Active Directory, and I'm actually going to cover a few more in the next videos once we'll establish other parts of the lab. But for getting started, Active Directory domain services is what we're after. You can see that once it says once you'll install Active Directory domain services, you need to install some additional things. It'll tell you need to do this and that and adds this. You only need to say add, and it will add all the prerequisite. And this is where it goes to the next part, where you can see the features that are installed. You can see these features are group policy. You can see the feature is remote server administration tools, and also some things from PowerShell. Right now it tells you these are the tools that it's going to configure, and then basically you need to restart the destination server if needed. This just means that during the installation, if it needs to reboot the machine, it will reboot it automatically, and you don't have to click something manually. You click on the install, it goes through the installation. It's usually a pretty fast installation, so we'll wait for a sec. So as you can see, the installation was completed, and right now what we have is a DC that finished the prerequisite part. It still needs to be promoted to domain controller. As you can see, it says there is additional steps required to make this machine a domain controller. You can click here on this link, or you can write in the command line DC promo. The end result will be the same. So right now when we're doing the deployment, this is the actual software configuration part of Active Directory. So we've installed the prerequisite, we have everything in place. Now we need to create the application level domain. And right now we need to select one of the three options. Add a domain control to an existing domain means that you already have a domain ready and you want to create another domain control in this environment. More on that if you go towards more configuring a larger environment, which I'll cover maybe in a future list of videos. You can add the domain to an existing forest, which means you are adding a new domain to the forest. So there's multiple domains on the same privilege level in a tree structure. This is something that is also a more advanced topic that we're not going to cover in this video segment. We're going to stick with a single domain, single forest, and this means that we'll need to create it because this is the first time we're adding a forest. So we'll call it lab 1, or maybe let's call it lab project.local, just to make it nice. And right now, once we do the next part, it creates this initial domain name. As you can see here, it says this domain control will also have DNS and global catalog capabilities. This is important because without them, we don't have the functioning Active Directory. So this is the part where we add a DNS server. You need to specify a recovery password. I'm just going to put something. This is used when you need to reboot the domain controller in safe mode and do some maintenance or something critical. Really, you need to put something you remember, and there's really limited options to recover this. So make sure you put something you can remember. Next, the DNS, it tells you that there is no DNS server. It's not authoritative and such. It doesn't have the option to create a delegation. When you do the next, it'll tell you, okay, so what is the NetBIOS name if we are not able to do the DNS resolve? It takes a while, as you can see at the top. Lab project. It'll give you the default paths of C Windows, the C Windows root, C Windows NTDS, C Windows sysvol. You can leave that at the default. From my experience, it's pretty much always the default. People don't really move this. So you can keep it as that. Review for everything, kind of overview of everything was done. A prerequisite check. Then this is where we're going to see the prerequisite. And you can see it pops up. It gives us some warnings. So Windows Server, you can see a lot of warnings here. Some of them regarding security, some of them regarding the delegation. But obviously, all prerequisite checks successfully. The warnings should be addressed if there's still a problem or an issue. I can tell you that the delegation warning is something that is basically there's no DNS server, so we can't do a delegation. It's okay. It's as intended. You can also install the DNS server in advance, do some delegation and such. And really, there's nothing here other than clicking the install. So now it's going to install. Gonna pause the video here until it finishes. And as you can see, the server was configured successfully and it completed, and the installation was completed, and it now will reboot. The reason why it reboots now is because it's basically going to log us in now as a domain entity inside the domain controller. So you can see the user administrator will be elevated to the domain administrator, which is what will happen during the installation of the AD. We're also going to log into the context of Active Directory. So we're no longer logging into the local machine. We're going to log into the domain host entity, and which means that we're basically creating a new profile for the administrator that is logging in. We're basically creating a first start for the environment. So it'll finish the settings, and you're going to see that we're going to log into labproject.local. So now once we have the login screen, as you can see, we're logging into lab project as administrator. It's going to use the same password that you specified for normal administrator. So once we're logged into the environment, we're able to see a few new things that were added. Let's start with a quick overview of a few things. So you can see under the Windows administrative tools, you can see the little new, but we have a few new tools that are related to Active Directory management. Some of them are listed here: Active Directory domains and trust, Active Directory users and computers, sites and services, and such. I'm going to cover a few of the basics here in this video, just to show you a few things to make sure everything is installed properly. So Active Directory users and computers, if you go to there, you can see this little folder structure. This is how you will manage your domains. There's also a new flavor of Active Directory users and computers, which is basically under the Active Directory Administrative Center, but we're going to cover this user interface for now. You can see that under the domain object, you have containers, which are basically look like folder. You have OUs, which look like folders with a little icon. And inside one of the OUs, for example, the domain controllers, you can see the actual computer of the domain controller. Very simple stuff. I'll cover it more in detail when we'll do some more advanced configuration here. But for now, let's just create another administrative task for us. Let's create a new user. We'll call the user Dave. So you can see we can specify the username, Dave, and we can give it a login name, which is what we need. And we can remove the login change password and just give it a nice password so we'll be able to log in. And once we save this, we have a user called Dave in the environment. That's fantastic. Another thing I want to validate is the network configuration, specifically the DNS. So as you can see, we can go into the administrative tools again and go into the DNS. This server was added to the environment in order for us to basically host Active Directory. You can see that it created all kinds of zones. Forward lookup zone is the one we're interested in at the moment. So forward lookup zone, and then we can see that we have a zone for lab project, and inside the zone of lab project, I can see the various both TCP sites, default site, TCP, and also under TCP here, I can see the various SRV records, which is the service records that the host will use, that the user who will want to join the domain will use in order for them to be able to join the domain or communicate with the domain controller. So you can see it's all pointing to lab1dc project local, which is the name of this machine. I will cover DNS in more detail in the following videos, but there is one thing I would like to configure right now, which is important. Under the DNS, there is one thing called forwarders. So let's talk about the name resolution of this environment at the moment. Right now, if I look at this machine resolves the networking DNS to the local box 127.0.0.1. This was one of the steps that we've configured in order to configure Active Directory properly. This means that right now, if this DNS server does not know how to resolve, it will do the normal steps of a DNS server of trying to go to the internet to resolve using the root hints. But since there is no direct communication to the internet from this machine at the moment, and even if it will be a direct connection in the future, you still would like to configure something called a forwarders. And a forwarder means that every time I do not know the answer for the DNS query as an Active Directory, I'm going to forward the request to another machine. And I'm going to specify the 192.168.1.1, which is the local gateway, the local DNS server that I have right now. And this will be my my hub to communicate out. Now this is going to fail at the moment. The reason being is that I've yet to configure the router in this environment, so the gateway is currently not resolved. But once we'll do that, it's a good thing to do right now, so we won't forget it, and it will work just fine. And I'll show you the result.